are now tuned in to the Storm Tracker podcast.
Welcome back, Canes family, to the Storm Tracker podcast. Marcus Benjamin here representing for CanesCounty.com, part of the Rivals.com network. Make sure you subscribe to the website, CanesCounty.com, for free. Use the promo code Miami30. Also subscribe to this YouTube channel, live from Canes County, as well as this podcast on all platforms. Today we have our Scouting the Opponent episode where we talk about the opponent of the Miami Hurricanes this week. And of course, they play the Duke Blue Devils. The Fighting Manny Diaz's will come to town to play the Miami Hurricanes, the undefeated Miami Hurricanes, who are ranked 5th in the country. And to talk about the Blue Devils, I've got Conor O'Neil, who joins me from the Duke Rivals site. And he's going to provide some insight on the Blue Devils, who the Miami Hurricanes play on Saturday at noon. Thanks for joining me today, Conor.
Thanks for having me, Marcus. Feels good to get a little coastal matchup back in our lives here. Duke just played SMU, so that was very much a departure from the normal ACC coastal matchup. So I'm glad they can get back and give us a little taste of what we had.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a 1-year hiatus from this matchup, but it's back. The last time, though, Miami played Duke at home, it was an embarrassment for the Hurricanes. They got boat raced. I'm not going to lie to you. I believe the score was 45-20, and it was definitely kind of, I think, a wake-up call for where the Miami Hurricanes football program was at the time, but now it's been a complete turnaround with Mario Cristobal here now at the helm here in year 3. But Manny Diaz, the former Miami coach, comes back home. So first, I kind of want to ask about that. I'm sure you guys being the media, kind of asked about him returning to Miami. So I'm kind of wondering, kind of what's the feel from him coming back home, and do you kind of get a sense that this team is really looking to kind of play for their head coach to get a win down in South Florida against the Canes?
So I'll start with the first part. Manny, it was somewhere between admitting that there are a lot of feelings for this going into this game for him, but also downplaying the outside noise of it. He cited a philosopher, Heraclitus. I probably botched that pronunciation, but the gist of it was no man ever crosses a river twice, for he is not the same man and it is not the same river. And basically saying, you're a different person. He made it very clear that he has moved on. He's in a different place. I think he's a different head coach. I mean, I didn't have that firm a grasp on his program for the 3 years that he was in charge down there, but I get the sense that the learning from his 3 years there and then the 2 years that he spent at Penn State as the DC really altered the way he coaches. And so he is a much different head coach than what Miami fans are used to seeing for those 3 years. As far as the team goes, this is one of those ones where they've told us one thing, and it's not that I think they're lying to us, but it's something that I think if Duke were to win, we see a completely different reaction than what we've been led to believe, which basically means, we asked the player I asked the player yesterday about, how much have you talked about the fact that Manny was down there? How much of a motivating factor is it? And he just basically said that it's not. They haven't talked about it. They want to go play hard and win a game because it's a game on the schedule, and it's a really good team that they should be motivated to beat, not because it's the former employer of their head coach, but because it's Miami. It's the number 5 team in the country.
Yeah.
but it is something where, like, you know, they told us that I think it was the North Carolina game. Duke hadn't beaten Carolina in like 6 years. They were down 20-0 in the second half and came back and won 21-20. And all throughout the week, they're telling us how it was just another game. They couldn't get caught up in the hype of like what it would mean to beat their biggest rival for the first time in any player. And they have no players on the team that were around the last time they beat Carolina, and they downplayed it. And then we get the post-game locker room scenes of like them smoking cigars and taking victory photos. And it's like, okay, this did mean a little bit more to you than a normal like win over UConn at home. Like this
Right.
was a big deal. You guys were, not to say they're full of crap, but they were kind of downplaying us and kind of misleading us throughout the week on that one.
Interesting. So it's interesting to kind of hear and see kind of the coaches speak and the just the media the type of responses that you get, but it's not exactly what is exactly going on in the locker room.
Right.
Yeah. So the Blue Devils are 6-2 though. They are bowl eligible already. You know, they've beaten some teams, you know, and they've lost a couple of games, you know, here. The last one in particular was a close one against a pretty good SMU team. You know, they were 11-point underdogs going into this game. I know that because I put a little something on it and won. So I would say they've exceeded expectations, you know, from what I've seen. So from what you've seen on your end, Connor, what has kind of impressed you with this Duke team so far, becoming bowl eligible at this point of the season? And then also, you know, what's discouraging about the Blue Devils?
I think the most impressive part is their defense. You know, they already kind of had the makeover defensively when they went from David Cutcliffe to Mike Elko. I mean, their defense was just porous in those last couple of years with Cut. And you figured hiring a defensive-minded coach with the pedigree that Mike Elko had, they would get better on that side of the ball. But it was drastic from 2021 to 2022. And then it maintained for the most part the last 2 seasons. Duke was really hard to score against for most teams. And so they didn't need to have another jump forward. They couldn't jump so far forward from where they were the last 2 years. But I kind of expected some regression there. Like they lost their best 3 defensive tackles, their best defensive end. They lost a few guys in the secondary who had come in. I think they were okay at linebacker, but they lost their nickel also, if you want to call that a linebacker safety hybrid. So I kind of expected them to take a step back defensively. They're better defensively in some areas than they were the last 2 years. They create so much havoc in TFLs and sacks, and they're doing it with guys that aren't 4- and 5-star recruits. It's the scheme that Manny uses, the get vertical as fast as you can and play upfield and have trust that where you're leaving is going to be filled by somebody coming from behind you. It really has paid off in so many ways. And I know they're worse now, but they went into the SMU game 4th in the country in yards per play allowed. They're just a phenomenal defensive unit. And that's really what they've leaned heavily on to win a lot of games. I'd say the disappointing part is just the offense's inconsistency. Some of that has to do with injuries. Like they've lost their top 2 tight ends to season enders. So they're playing a guy who like a year and a half ago was a defensive lineman. They moved him to the offensive line in the spring. Now he's playing tight end in the middle of the season. And they're playing a redshirt sophomore that had not played very much at all at tight end. Jordan Moore is their best receiver, and he's been really banged up since the 3rd game of the year against UConn. And they're trying to get him to a point where he's as explosive as he was and he's struggling to get back to that point. So they've got some excuses there, but more than anything, the offense has to produce. I mean, you're coming off a game that it's kind of mind blowing. They forced 6 turnovers against SMU, and there were no points off 6 turnovers. I think teams that have forced 6, that are +6 in the turnover battle in the last like 25 years are now 2-124. Or teams that have lost the turnover battle by 6. Gosh, I screwed up that stat. I'm busy watching Brashard Smith highlights. He's pretty good.
Yeah, former Miami Hurricane. I believe he was recruited by Manny Diaz as well. So
yeah, that was the weird thing about watching SMU, and kind of throw it back to your first question about Manny facing Miami. It kind of helps, I think, in the distraction area that like they just had a game where it was almost like Manny and some of the guys on Duke's staff were looking in a mirror, because you got Rhett Lashley over there, you've got Brashard Smith, both defensive ends, Jafari Harvey, and oh gosh, I'm blanking on the other name. Man, that's gonna bug me for the rest of the day if I can't figure that out. But both starting defensive ends for SMU were Miami guys. Yeah, and they're looking at the SMU
Roberts.
Yes. And you're looking at the SMU offense, and like it's the exact same thing that Jonathan Brewer wants to do and what Duke wants to do. So yeah, it was a weird matchup last week.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting watching, SMU, because they're like the former Miami Hurricane. There's so many former Miami Hurricanes on that squad. Obviously, Rhett Lashley's the coach, who used to be the former offensive coordinator. So you got guys like Brashard Smith and Jalen Knight and just a bunch of guys who used to be Miami Hurricanes. But going into this game, what do you think has been kind of the most, I guess, discouraging from this team? Obviously, you've kind of pointed out that, the defense has been strong, led by Manny Diaz, of course. But, what about the other side of the ball? Like, how are you feeling about the other side of the ball? And how have these Blue Devils been able to get 6 wins with an offense that is definitely not as explosive as you would like to see?
Yeah, they've lost some things offensively from what we saw in the first few weeks of the year, and there's a lot of reasons for it. It's kind of interesting where sometimes you go through July and August and you think what a team's biggest struggle is going to be, or a unit's biggest hurdle to overcome will be, and you think they're not going to overcome it. For us, that was their offensive line. Like they barely had an offensive line in the spring. The spring game was almost a bad joke. They had 5 offensive linemen suited up for it. They could only play 11 on 11 for like half of the spring game, and the other half they just had the defensive line like take 2 steps forward and then take a knee because the offense was playing 7 on 7. So their offensive line has actually been good. Like they've been solid. They've had, I think they're going on 3 or 4 games in a row where the starters have played every single snap, and they've been playing at a pretty high level. So it's not been the area that we thought was going to be the weakness. It's more so Malik Murphy has the ability to look like he is a future NFL quarterback. He has a rocket launcher for an arm. He can make a lot of throws that are difficult throws for 95% of college quarterbacks look easy. But he also has moments where it's just inconsistent. It's he'll miss layups. Drops haven't helped. I mean, you'll throw that in there every once in a while, but it's he's an interesting quarterback, man. I've been trying to put it into words all season, really, of who he compares to, who he looks like. I've kind of landed on, like, I think of Mac Jones and what he was at Alabama. And Mac Jones was really good at one thing, which was sitting in the pocket and throwing the ball. I think that's kind of what Malik is. And then every other part of Malik's game probably needs to improve. I mean, he's not going to become a dual threat quarterback all of a sudden, but he does need to get out and run a little bit more. He doesn't throw off platform. He doesn't extend plays very often. He actually extended more plays against SMU than I've seen him do all year. So there's some inconsistency at the quarterback position that you can point at and say this is what needs to be smoothed out. But like you're seeing on the throw to Quayshawn Brown, I mean, that's a flick of the wrist and the ball travels 40, 45 yards in the air and hits a guy in stride. It's just the arm talent is ridiculous. And he's such a good quarterback when it comes to that one thing, which is just sitting in the pocket and throwing the ball.
Gotcha. Yeah, Malik Murphy is part of the reason why this team has kind of struggled on third down. From what I've seen, they're 127th out of 132 teams when it comes to third down. So that is an area that for Duke fans, you're hoping that improves against Miami on Saturday afternoon. And Duke also plays usually at a quick pace as well, from what I've seen. So from your end, Conor, just how has that quick pace either helped or hurt Duke offensively?
I think tempo helps. I also think sometimes it's hard to say it's hurt the defense because the defense has been so good. I mean, it'd be one thing if you felt like the defense was wearing down at the end of games, but I mean, they forced 3 turnovers in the last 9 minutes against SMU and gave their offense a chance to win every chance in the world to win the game. My concern would be whether that continues into November. If you're still losing time of possession, if you're still having 3 and outs that last less than a minute, it always feels like you can get away with some of that in September and October. But when your depth is really wearing thin in November and you're still doing it, it's going to bite you harder than the first 2 months of the year. So I want to see how that plays out over the next 4 games.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll kind of see how that happens. Miami dominated in time of possession in the last game that they played against Florida State. So they can completely kind of control the game. And then the running game also has been getting going in the last 2 games for Miami. Of course, they've got the Heisman candidate in Cam Ward, who can basically throw it all over the field if needed. So it was nice to see Miami be balanced in these last couple of games, which I think can only help a team help them against a team that plays with a quick pace if they can get them off the field quickly. So we'll see how that definitely plays out in the afternoon.
Yeah.
When it comes to Duke's playmakers on both sides of the ball, though, Conor, like, who are some of the guys that Miami fans should be aware of come Saturday?
I'll start with defense because it's just where my mind goes when you ask me who Duke's playmakers are. Number 0 is an undersized corner, Chandler Rivers. He has an interception in each of the last 2 games. He is, I mean, as we progress and as every receiver gets to be bigger and stronger and faster, everybody wants their corners to be bigger, faster, stronger. I think Chandler Rivers, I think he's listed at 5'10", maybe 185, 190. I don't know if he's actually 5'10", and I don't know that it matters. He is one of the most sure tacklers that Duke has. He's just he's a legitimate lockdown corner. And How that translates against Miami's receivers, maybe he doesn't look like a lockdown corner in this game, because I think I'm pretty confident in saying this is the best receiver group that Duke will have played. They're getting great stuff out of two transfer linebackers, Ozzie Nicholas from Princeton and Alex Howard from Youngstown State. Not exactly where you think you're going to find transfer linebackers, but
right.
Like that's another one of the constants between the Mike Elko tenure and the Manny Diaz one, or the Manny Diaz season to this point. You don't have to bring in transfers from big P5s or P4s to find your playmakers. These are just kind of two of the latest examples over the last 3 years of bringing in high impact guys that come from a lower level and are able to make an immediate impact for an ACC program. Offensively, Duke is trying to get Jordan Moore going, and he only played 12 snaps against Florida State. He'd averaged like 53 for the first 2.5 years that he's been a receiver. He was a quarterback under David Cutcliffe. He played 50 against SMU. So it seems like he's back in a place where he can make plays on the outside. Against SMU, though, the best receiver on the field was Eli Pankel. And he's a really interesting story for Duke. He's a sixth-year guy. He missed all of last season because of a catastrophic season-ending injury in fall camp. But he has come back, and he is better than he ever was. It's unfair to him for me to say this, but the first few years that I covered Duke, he always struck me as more of a look like Tarzan, play like Jane type of receiver. Like you always just wanted more out of him when you looked at his size, and he was really the only receiver in Duke's rotation who had size the last couple of years. He's like 6'2", 210. You look at him, and for the last couple of years, you thought he should be physical. He should be more physical than he is. He should be winning more contested catches than he is. Well, he's kind of doing that now. Like it's all come together for him now. I think he was 3 for 4 on contested catches against SMU. I think career highs in both catches with 11 and yards for like 134 or 138, something in that neighborhood. He scored the touchdown in overtime, and he was the one they were trying to get the ball to on the 2-point conversion. That, you know, if that ball's thrown another couple inches to the inside, then we're probably talking about a 7-1 Duke team coming off of a huge emotional win instead of a emotional loss. So
right.
Those two on the outside, and then Star Thomas at running back, another transfer that didn't come from a program with a lot of pedigree. He came from New Mexico State, but he's been really good. He's got a great center of balance. He's able to kind of take some tackle attempts and bounce off of them and keep going. And they've really needed him because their starting running back has only played basically one game healthy. Jaquez Moore got hurt at Northwestern, and we've seen him for one snap since Duke's second game of the year. And I'm not sure how much we can see of him in this next month.
Interesting stuff from Conor O'Neil, the publisher of Devils Illustrated. So based on what you said, man, it sounds like Miami kind of has the advantage almost at every position group, you know, because when you talk about the receivers, I mean, you've got a couple that I feel like, you know, Miami's can maybe focus on, you know, and when it comes to the offensive line, I think Miami has a big advantage when it comes to the defensive line going at it. You know, we've talked about the quarterbacks. Obviously, Cam Ward is you know, arguably the best in the country. Malik Murphy, you know, is kind of hit or miss, I guess you could say, based on what you shared today. So it sounds like Miami should maybe cover the spread here, because they are favored by 20, I think 20.5 points kind of going into this game. And that was the same spread last week against Florida State. They barely got it. 22-point victory for the Canes over the Noles. So now, as we come to the end of this episode, as we do all the time on scouting the opponent, kind of want to get your prediction of what the score would be at the end of this game. Do you see the Canes covering the spread? Do you see Duke pulling off an upset?
I definitely don't see Duke pulling off an upset. I have no reservations about saying that part of it. As far as the 20-point spread, I mean, that's a big number. And it's a little bit of a cop out, but I could easily see a score being in the neighborhood of like 30-10. God, I think it'll be a victory in and of itself if Duke just holds Miami to their lowest point total of the year. I had their schedule pulled up earlier. I can't remember, but is 36 against Florida State, is that the lowest they've scored all year?
It is the lowest they scored all year.
Yeah, I think it's a realistic goal for Duke to just hold them under 30. SMU scoring 28 last week in overtime is the most that Duke has allowed this year. So something's going to happen where either Miami scores its season low or Duke gives up a season high because the averages are so far apart there. I do have a little more faith in Duke being able to move the ball against Miami than maybe most Miami fans would think. That's the problem with trying to predict what an inconsistent offense is going to do, though. Like,
yeah,
Malik Murphy, the Florida State game, every Duke fan, even though they beat Florida State for the first time in program history, they all wanted Malik to be benched. They wanted Jonathan Brewer, the offensive coordinator, to be fired. I mean, it was an overreaction to a win, and they come out against SMU, and I think everybody was kind of already geared up for things to go bad, and all of a sudden Duke came out throwing the ball all over the yard, and it's like, hey, this can work. It hasn't worked as often or as consistently as they wanted, but it can work, and I think that's where Duke can probably put together a few drives, and whether they score touchdowns or field goals is probably going to be the difference in this game. That's the other part of it too. Is Duke has missed 3 kicks in a row. They miss an extra point because of either a bad snap or a bad hold. Their field goal kicker just pulled a 42-yarder after one of those late turnovers that SMU had. And then they had the potential game winner blocked when Jafari Harvey just hurdled the defensive line. One of the most athletic things I've ever seen, I think.
Yeah.
And you hear Bo the dog didn't like the field goal block, I guess. I didn't know he was a Duke fan. But no, it's going to be an interesting game. I guess if you're asking me to put a score on it, I'll say 38-21, and Duke covers, but Miami is comfortable again and cruises to 9-0.
I'm with you on the 38 for Miami for sure. I think they're going to be around that range, around the same range against the Florida State. The Florida State game is concerned, but I just don't see the Duke offense scoring that many touchdowns against a Miami defense that's pretty decent against third down. So I feel like they'll limit them to more field goals than touchdowns. So I see this being like a 38-13 type of game when it's all said and done, because I just feel like Miami's going to force Murphy into some mistakes here. I do think they're going to move the ball, though. I feel like they're going to move the ball pretty well, but I feel like once they get into the red zone or they get into, Miami territory, that Miami finds a way to either get off the field or turnover on downs or something like that. Very similar to that Florida State game. So almost the exact score of the Florida State game from last week was 36-14. Yeah, I think this is going to be like a 38-13 type of game when it's all said and done, because I think the only way Miami keeps this close is if they beat themselves, if they, turn the ball over in their own territory, or, they miss field goals or like something in that realm. I think there's the only way that this game remains close. Now, if this game was in Duke, I think it would be even closer for sure. But I think with Miami being at home, I think it's not a game I believe the Hurricanes will sleep on. And there's not a matchup coming up that they could look ahead to as well. And Miami has been communicating this 1-0 mentality pretty much all year. So I feel like they are pretty concentrated on every week here. And I'm pretty sure they're probably playing the highlights of the 45-20 game from a couple of years ago, just to remind them just, hey, Duke is not to be slept on, especially with, Manny Diaz now at the helm for the Blue Devils, who, knows some of these players very well and how they play. So will be interesting to see how it plays out on Saturday. Are you coming down for the game?
I'm not. I'm going to be watching from home, and I guess it might be a little disrespectful on a football podcast to say this, but basketball season starts on Monday. So
right.
I'll be dialed into the game, but also there's 2 5-star basketball kids committing in the 12-3 window that both have Duke in their final 3. I think Duke gets one of them. And I think there's a kid that Wake is involved with that is also announcing, and I'm the publisher of the Wake Forest site also. So
sure,
I'll have both eyes on Miami Duke on the TV, but I'll also have one that kind of peeks back over to check on some basketball stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, Duke won the battle for Cam Boozer over Miami.
How did we go a half hour without talking about the Boozers here?
Yeah, I know. Exactly, man. There'll be plenty of time to kind of talk about that during the season. We will see each other again, by the way, Connor, because, Miami does play Wake Forest, and you are the publisher for that site as well. So, we'll see each other again for another edition of Scouting the Opponent. Thanks for joining me today.
Sounds great. Thanks, Marcus.
That's going to wrap it up for the Storm Tracker podcast, the Scouting of the Opponent. Duke, Miami plays the Blue Devils this Saturday. And make sure you subscribe to the website, canescounty.com, for free. Use the promo code Miami30. Also subscribe to this podcast on all platforms, as well as subscribe to this YouTube channel live from Canes County. Until the next episode.